Well, hello and welcome. My name is Reed Summers, and I'd like to welcome you to Emergent, this new podcast that I am supporting and offering. And it's been an adventure so far, and I'm looking forward to tonight and where we can go together. This is episode 2 of Emergent, and we're going to be looking at breaking barriers, the UFO conversations we need to have. And it is my inspiration tonight to really explore the following 5 areas. And as we do so, explore what are the breakthrough conversations that we really need to be having about UFOs. Because the phenomenon, in my view, is real, it's moving and evolving, and there is not yet enough progress being made to uncover its fundamental reality. And so tonight will be all about that. The plan in episode 2 is we're going to talk about what those breakthrough conversations are that we need to be having. We're going to look at the UFO discourse as a whole and talk about its present and future state. And then I'd like to explore talking to the people and my experience of going to the street level and having the UFO conversation with average folks out in the world. And then at the end, I'll be giving you my thoughts on the election and then looking ahead to the November UFO hearing. So that's the plan for episode 2. So the subtitle of this show, at least in a working form, is The Front Lines of the Phenomenon. And there really are 3 front lines that I'd like to explore tonight and as we go forward. There's the front lines of the phenomenon itself, its presence, its activity, and its potential involvements in our human world. Then there's the front lines of disclosure, the disclosure of the phenomenon. And then finally, there's the front lines of our human response to both the presence of this phenomenon and its disclosure to the public. So these are the 3 front lines in my view. And before we set off together, I want to invite you to hold in your mind an image. And the image is that of the UFO audience, crowd, community, ufology, however you think of that body of people who are aware and who have some understanding of what UFOs are. And then imagine the broad public who is not a part of that conversation yet. They're not yet aware and they don't yet understand. Tonight, what I would like to do is hop the fence of ufology, scramble up the little ridgeline above this encampment in the desert, and look back down on the rest of the world. Sit up there and think about the global humanity and the possibility that that broad swath of human awareness and understanding might be activated by the disclosure of this phenomenon. So I'll be sitting up there on that ridgeline looking down. I invite you to do so with me as well. So let's talk about the UFO conversations that we need to be having. And the image for tonight, though it might look a bit harsh, is one of breaking glass. There's a glass ceiling over the study and analysis and consideration of the UFO reality. Who put that glass ceiling there? Who maintains it? Who keeps it in place? We'll get into that. But there is a glass ceiling. The state of the front lines of the phenomenon are frozen. These are frozen front lines in many ways. And my hope is to break through that glass, do the least amount of damage as possible, but allow us to extend our awareness and penetration into this anomalous enigma. It's like a sphere, right? And I'd like to penetrate deeper into the layers of that sphere all the way to its core, if possible. Not with absolute understanding, not with complete certainty, but with the right questions and potentially informing further analysis, better evidence collection over time. So we'll be doing that tonight. I'd also like to give you this image of 3 concentric circles. As I see it, there is a community of people in the world who is not only aware that this phenomenon is happening, but who have some actual understanding of it. And that has been gleaned over many years of diligent research and analysis in the field and outside of it. And it has yielded an evidential record that we can use to come to some kind of starting understanding. And so there is that community in the world. And then beyond it is a community of people who are aware. They may not understand, they may not know what's going on, but they are aware at some level that there is an anomalous phenomenon in our world operating in ways we don't understand, that there might be a cover-up. So this is a ring of people who are aware. And then out beyond that is a ring of the larger humanity that has minimal awareness and possibly no understanding. And in tonight's conversation, we're going to start within the circle of the UFO community and then press out to the edges. And as we do so, we're also going to press into the core of the phenomenon. And then at the very end, talk about how can these conversations that I'd like to introduce to you make it out into the public slowly over time as disclosure of this phenomenon takes place. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over to a newsletter that I wrote in preparation for this episode. You can see that on my newsletter archives page. And in this newsletter, I talk about the 3 levels of the conversation, as I just stated. And then I number 5 conversations we need to be having. So the first, how can we assess the motive and intent of non-human intelligence? What is the scale and scope of this phenomenon? And what is the depth of its penetration into our human world? Is this a visitation, a habitation, or a perpetual cohabitation? Is there a form of non-consensual contact taking place? And if so, what are the implications? And then what are the risks and possible implications of adopting non-human technology and science, even alliances with non-human intelligence? So those 5 questions I threw out there on Monday. You might have seen them already. So buckle up. The mountain is over there. We're not going to go all the way to the summit tonight, but we're going to go pretty far up onto the shoulders of that mountain and hopefully gain a new vantage point from which to see the phenomenon, our response to the phenomenon, and the wider world that might in time become aware of both. I think this vantage point is critical. I think in so many ways, those who are even aware and understand the nature of UFOs at some level, even they are desperately unable to see the forest for the trees. There is a loss of perspective that is leading to an inability to logically progress towards greater levels of certainty over time, starting with an assessment. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And so as we climb in here, I'd just like to invite you to expand that perspective. Get out of the forest for a minute, go up onto the mountain with me, and go beyond the phenomenon as we've known it, called UFO, UAP, and the photos, videos, possible materials, testimony that's associated with it, the luminous objects in the sky, the shiny objects on the surface of the ocean, important indications and evidence. But in truth, this phenomenon is much bigger than that. Inside that craft is potentially an entity. Who's behind the wheel is an entity operator. And so beyond even the nuts and bolts of the physicality of the phenomenon, there is an entity at play, potentially. But even beyond that entity, there are many different craft present in our world. There are thousands of sightings per year. It's not just one entity in one craft, multiple entities, and they're not all individual and disconnected from one another. It's clear that there is possibly some kind of non-human intelligent, non-human force in our world. And so what is that force? Is there one? Are there multiple? Are they in competition? Are they in collaboration? Are they aware of each other? Are they interacting? Right? And so now we're expanding beyond the physicality, the single entity, the many single entities to account for the presence of forces from beyond our world, or that are at least not human in nature, present in our world. But then expand even further to understand that these forces have some kind of connection to an exosystem of life beyond our world, or an exopolitical environment of interaction, dynamics in relationship, possible rules and regulations. These are not things we can collectively come to know yet, but we can ask the question and just hold in our awareness that in all likelihood, it is out there. It is real. We cannot understand it yet, but in time we do need to understand it. And so if we can go beyond that focalized, fixated orientation to just the evidence and just the nuts and bolts and expand our awareness to understand that this is potentially contact at a multi-species level and at a planetary level. It's very big. It has consequences. And this is how I engage with the phenomenon myself. I'm happy to dive into the evidence and talk about the different aspects of the phenomenon, but in its entirety, I do believe there is an evolutionary event taking place at a whole species level. And we need to begin asking the questions that probe at the cause for that contact, the motive and the intent for the entities involved, and what is happening as their world from beyond our world collides literally with our world, our human world. When these civilizations meet, what will happen? What is already happening? Something may already be happening in that respect. So let's take it at that, and we'll start to explore and walk around the more complete, larger phenomenon that is taking place. I'd also like to talk about why have these conversations? Why do this? And I think there are some critical problems in our way, and I think it's worth identifying what those are because that would compel us to find solutions to get beyond them. I think it's well understood that there is a long-standing attempt by government and other human entities to obfuscate this reality, to distract those who are aware of it, and to generally contain, possibly even corral, the community of people who are working on it. I would also like to introduce the possibility that it is not just human actors who are doing that, but also non-human actors. That is very possible, and there are indications of that. And if we can acknowledge that there is a barrier between what you might call the UFO community and the wider world, and that barrier has been externally imposed by potentially bad actors in the world who wish to obfuscate this, but may also be internally imposed and reinforced over time by the very people who are trying to uncover the nature of the phenomenon. Ufology has problems inside of it. And I don't think it's any wonder why they're there. I think it makes sense when you come to understand them. But I'd like to touch on a few of those. This is a tweet from me earlier this year. I'll read it to you. Just because the UFO cover-up is real doesn't mean every other conspiracy is real and should be entertained. I urge people involved in this issue of UFO UAP disclosure to avoid the slippery slope of instant association to other conspiratorial claims, many of which are baseless or worse, manufactured. This can lead to a kind of self-corralling of one's perception into more and more extreme distillations of conspiratorial thought, creating a subtle but powerful separation from the mainstream human narrative. Whether you agree with me or not, just know there are forces in the world that would want you to do so. Conspiracies are real, and I think the UFO cover-up is one of them. But there is a problem of not policing our own minds and staying disciplined in how we interface with this phenomenon and not allowing other possibly manufactured narratives to enter this space, to pollute it, and to essentially discredit it and keep it at the fringe of society. And I do see this happening. So I think, and this will come in later in today's episode when we talk about taking it to the street. In my introduction of this phenomenon to people, I am very careful and very disciplined in how I present it and orient them to it without polluting it with all of Reed's other theories or other conspiratorial claims that I may have misassociated with the UFO phenomenon. And so I do think there is some level of this pollution of the space and this possible psychological corralling. And I'd like to share a passage with you. This is from Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And as I think about this, I don't think it's any wonder why and how these tactics are used to keep this at the fringe and to discredit it in the mainstream. And I think we need to become a little bit more wise to how that might be happening. By discovering the enemy's dispositions and remaining invisible ourselves, we can keep our forces concentrated while the enemy's must be divided. I see a lot of distraction and a lot of division in the UFO community. And I think it's time to understand that we're playing a card game, and we have been playing it for a very long time. And something is wrong. This game is not yielding positive results in many ways, despite all the good efforts. And so I think it's time to start to question the cards in our hand. I think it's time to start questioning the dealer. I think it's time to start questioning the casino. It's time to start questioning the game itself, the game of how we interface with, quote, evidence and how we research this phenomenon. Because if we are internally self-obfuscating by accident, even inadvertently, and creating a barrier to the public that discredits ufology and the UFO movement, that's going to be a problem. It's also going to prevent those who are aware and have understanding from informing the public and being a part of this disclosure at that level. And so, in summary, I think we have to be aware of the attempts at obfuscation. We have to know that some of that is to seed false narratives and associate that to the UFO reality, and also to trigger our human tendencies towards novel distraction, right? And it's almost like the image of a dog, and the moment it hears something, it turns its head. It's instant distraction. We're not able to penetrate this phenomenon because we are being distracted by too much novelty, too much infighting, too many egos, narcissistic personalities. There are problems, and we need to be aware of those as we proceed. And really, this is part of the glass that I would like to break today, because I feel that this community has been intentionally contained. And it's allowed to exist. Understanding is allowed to emerge regarding the cover-up and what's been done, said, but it's not getting out of this zone into the public, and that's because there are these barriers. So we have to break out of the encirclement, right? We have to penetrate its wall and break out, and outside the encirclement is the public, in my view. And to do this, this is the crux. This is the core thing, is we have to make a starting assessment of the phenomenon. I had, I forgot it at home, but I had a stack of papers at home with the same words printed on the front of of all 7 pages that said, situational assessment of non-human intelligence, motive, intent, and agenda. And then underneath that, it said 1950 to 1959, 1960 to 1969, 70 to 79, a decadal assessment of the non-human intelligence. I was going to hold that up to you and be like, where was this in the 1950s? Where was this in the 1960s, right? Where has our assessment been over the last 70 to 80 years regarding the event taking place, the probable explanations for what these entities are and what motivates them in our space, and an assessment of their activity and involvement in the world? We have not gotten to those front lines. We're way back off the front lines, in my view. And in my view, you don't get to the front lines and make assessments of those things by having absolute confidence, airtight proof, and complete certainty. You have to work off of something of an intelligence framework, where in the intelligence world, as you assess an adversary or a competitor or even an ally, you are working with incomplete, inaccurate, and at times deceptive information. You have to accept that that's the state of the information you have. Now, yes, you could spend 100 or 200 or 300 years studying them such that you have all the evidence. You've answered every question. It's all factually established. But then you would not be able to respond in a timely fashion to their interface with you. And this we have not done. A core problem, we have not made the starting assessment with the evidence we have. We have 80 years of great research and analysis and very strong indications regarding this non-human presence in our world. Can we assess with that? As we look ahead to the hearing in November, post-election, what's going to come out? We want more. We want more. We can't even use what we have. And I would ask, if more comes out in November or in January, how will we use that? Will we assess the nature of the entity and their visitation, their presence in the world? Or will we go off and seek more novel information and try to cobble together a grand puzzle over many, many years and essentially undertake no coherent species response to this non-human intelligent presence? because unfortunately, that is largely what has happened. So the question arises, and this is the first breakthrough conversation I want to have with you. How do we assess the nature, motive, and intent of the phenomenon? How do we actually do this? Well, again, in an intelligence setting, working with incomplete, inaccurate, or deceptive information at times, one must devise something of a framework, a cognitive process to move through what is available to make an informed assessment that is not a conclusion, just an assessment that can then inform better evidence collection, better analysis, or regarding more specific parameters that would either prove or disprove the assessment. And so we work in this sense through gradations of greater levels of certainty. We don't try to land at certainty all at once. And I think there is a process here. I would like to introduce to you my process. But before I do, I want to talk about the need to demonstrate existence. I think this is critical, and I don't want to overlook it. Before we move on to talk about intent, motive, involvement, we do need to demonstrate that there is a there, especially for the public's sake, and to get more of the public attention, energy, political will involved in the matter. And so there are very admirable attempts to demonstrate that there is a there. And I'd like to play this short video for you. This is Kevin Day. This is from a very good documentary, and I do recommend it. And it's called A Tear in the Sky. And this, to me, is a very solid starting point.
My goal for the expeditions is to prove they're real, prove they're findable, and prove these things are knowable. We can know what they are. That's my goal.
Very short clip. And I think that's excellent. I want to prove they're real, that they're detectable, and that they're knowable. And I would argue that we're getting to the point of knowability. We can begin to really strongly assess that in the grand field of possibilities, everything the universe could potentially throw our way, we're not dealing with all of those possibilities. We're dealing with more likely probabilities based on the indications and the evidence available. And we need to start to bound those possibilities into those probabilities. And until we do, it's almost like a possibility parade. We go around the block over and over again. Everyone's got their float just to say their theory, and everyone wants to be unique and have a novel theory. And we go around the block and we trade theories like little trading cards. And of course, it's not the maturest of approach. We need to respond to this phenomenon on a time scale appropriate to the nature of what it is doing in our world. And it most certainly is doing things in our world. I think there is a cost to not doing so. And we'll get into that as well. But there are great efforts underway. Good research is being done by SCU, UAPX, the Soul Foundation, and others in the citizen space. And I just want to highlight one example of that, which I think is very exciting. And that is the possibility of a citizen tracking initiative to track and detect UAP. This is a friend, Mitch, and he has launched a very important project, in my view, Ascendant AI, of dispersing at the citizen level a mesh of nodes that can track in real time anomalous objects with anomalous kinematic tracks, nonlinear tracks through the air. And though this may never achieve a level of deployment that detects the entirety of what's happening at all minutes of all hours of all days, it demonstrates a citizen capability. It forces the hands of those who have the real powerful capabilities in government to take note, and it begins to turn citizen awareness up to the sky. And I think this could be a very important part of the future picture. 100 million iPhones pointed at the sky, it makes it a different operating condition for the non-human intelligence that has been operating in covert fashion, undisclosed. And it starts to put a little bit more empowerment and the tools to uncover the nature of the reality in the hands of people. So I commend these citizen tracking, UAP tracking initiatives, and there are a number of them. All right. So let's see what we have next here. I should have mentioned, I have a lot to go through today. This is going to be an extensive episode. So go brew up a cup of hot tea, kick up your legs, or get your pack on, I think I said, because we're going up the mountain and there's a lot to share. So might be things to revisit afterwards, but bear with me. So there are other compelling reasons why we need a framework to progressively assess intent. And I'll just highlight a few of those just in rapid succession. Chris Mellon is well known for presenting what he describes as an intelligence failure on the part of the United States government to basically responsibly share information about this anomalous activity and to inform the public and to respond in due fashion to these incursions that are taking place that could potentially pose a risk to the security interests of this country, at least, but also that could bear some form of threatening behavior in the future. So there has been an intelligence failure. I would agree with that. Also, there seems to be other compelling factors for why this needs to get out. This is slide 15 of Carl Nell's presentation at the Seoul conference about a year ago. And in it, there are some phases. And I'll lead your eye to the red triangle that says off target. There are indications that disclosure and public involvement in this matter are not just an option or a preference or a good idea, but a necessity. And that has been spoken to by many who have come forward on this issue. And if true, that's somewhat alarming. What is the necessity? Why would disclosure be off target if not done by 2034? And here we enter the unknowns, the things we don't know, and also the known unknowns, the things we do know that we don't know regarding non-human intelligence. Because all too often, as I see it, NHI is counted as neutral, government is counted as the bad actor, and we claw and demand that government provide evidence to us and open up the gates of the Pentagon and let us in, let us through. And when really, it's not just the government. The non-human intelligence is also a player on this field. They have taken up a position in the world, okay? And a position to me means they have an interest. An interest could be for us, could be for them, but it is an interest, and it is an undisclosed interest. And as long as that remains there, we cannot, in all honesty, fixate solely upon our government and blame them solely for the cover-up. But that is the dynamic I see so often. So we need to begin to account for these potential black swan realities of either a mass appearance by non-human intelligence, some form of aggressive action or retaliatory action. These things have been discussed, and we need to discuss them more. And then last, what is another compelling reason to get into assessing intent of the non-human intelligence? It's the fact that there appears to be a widespread attempt to engage human beings directly by this presence, and to do so in ways that might be alarming. This is a statement that I would like to highlight from Ryan Robbins in one of his interviews with Bryce Zabel. And to me, it's an example of what assessment looks like. Observation of a probability leading to assessment not reliant on proof. This is the quote: "It's not proven, but I assess that abductions are likely happening." This is the kind of thing we need to be doing. Can we prove completely, without any doubt, that abductions are happening? And can we prove it to the public and to the government? No, probably not. But we can assess these things are happening based on the vast number of indications in the citizen space that people are having these interactions and have for decades. And so, assessment. Okay. At this point, I'm going to introduce to you my framework, and we'll go from there. I'm going to be using this throughout the Emergent podcast, revisiting it show by show. This is the kind of mental model that I work within. It is somewhat of a rhetorical tool at the same time as being literally a stepwise framework. But I think for myself, at least, it's useful, and maybe it's useful for you as well. The stages in this framework are the following. Before becoming aware, and thus having any understanding of this phenomenon, we are in the realm of impossibility. It is not possible that this could be happening, that UFOs are real, that there's a non-human intelligence, that it's operating in the world. And then something happens to move us along to considering this as possible. Very important step. And a lot of folks who are aware of this phenomenon are in possibility right now. And that's totally fine. I was myself as well. And in this expanded zone of what I call the aperture, you're exploring. And your aperture is wide open. You're taking in as much information as you can, as much light is coming into the sensor as possible. However, it is important to move beyond possibility in order to get down the road with this toward anything like a coherent response to the phenomenon. And I don't see steps 2 through 8 being undertaken by very many people. And part of my inspiration is to encourage people to take them, to get down the road with this. We've had 80 years to explore possibilities. We need to start talking about probabilities. And we have 8 capabilities to do so. And it's not just evidence. It's observation. We have the capability to observe. We have a human knowledge base. We actually know things about life, nature, species interaction. We have the capability to engage in logic. We have the capability to detect plausible scenarios. And we are, if we choose to be, inherently cautious, instinctual, and responsible. We can interface with it in those ways. I call these the 8 capabilities. And with those 8 capabilities, you can form a starting assessment. And with that, you go collect new and better evidence, you attune your instrument, you close down the aperture so that the image comes into focus, and you begin working towards a working conclusion, which again is not a final conclusion. It's still open to iteration. With that, you then can actually take a position on what this phenomenon most probably is, propose actions, negotiate your actions with others, and then ultimately work towards valuable outcomes. And those are my 3 valuable outcomes. And as you move along, yes, the aperture closes to bring the image into focus, but it also expands open again. I mean, this isn't just because we have a task ahead of us to discern the nature of the entities in our space and respond to them does not close down the possibilities of the universe. We can open those back up again. But I would argue that it's highly unlikely that every form of intent in the universe is present in our world all at once, at the same time, together, and that we're seeing it today. I think it's more likely that life moves in evolutionary waves. If there is a detrimental intent, it might be very difficult for an entity with a positive intent to function parallel to it. We'll have to see. But it's I doubt a rainbow of intent, nor is it black and white, but it's going to be tints of a certain color. And I think we need to start understanding that spectrum. And so by closing down the aperture, the image that is so out of focus today, because all the information is coming into our minds, we're taking in everything we possibly can, imagining every scenario of the universe, we can begin to clarify and focus the image and see more clearly. So in my mind, this is the value of having some kind of framework that is grounded in those capabilities and that moves one along a cognitive process toward greater and greater degrees of confident assertions regarding what this phenomenon most likely is and most likely is not. And I think we are all capable of that. And that's part of my encouragement and empowerment for those who watch this show and those who I speak with and when I give my lectures and so forth. I want to give people tools to approach this enigma, to think through the evidence available, and to come to greater degrees of certainty, and also be liberated in incremental degrees from the confusion that just seems to pervade the space and has for so many years. So I think we can move forward, not necessarily with more evidence, but with process. And as more evidence comes, take it into the process and let it clarify the assessment. But like I was saying in that ream of paper, there was an assessment that could have been made in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And we are not making that assessment. We're not moving down that process. And so we are in some ways as lost as ever. regarding the nature of the NHI. And we are also prone to overfixate on government, make ourselves the enemy, and basically assume that all the bad actors are human and all the good actors are non-human, which is a tremendous assumption to make, and not a very good one when you look at all of the contact-related phenomena, which we're going to be getting into now. Okay, so that was conversation number one. How do we assess intent? Conversation number two, we're going to start kind of at the edges of the known and work into more of the unknown. So conversation number two is, what is the true scope, breadth, and depth of the phenomenon taking place in our world? If we misestimate that, we may come to some very incorrect assumptions about the phenomenon. If we think it does not have breadth, it is narrow, right? It's just in the United States, or it's being seen only by military personnel. That's not accurate. If we think that the scope over time is that of an ever-present phenomenon, right? It's just always been here. There's nothing notable happening now relative to 300, 400, 500 years ago. We might misestimate the phenomenon as well. And depth, if we assume that the phenomenon is just in a remote observation of humanity, it's not actually entering our human space, it's not doing anything to anyone, it's purely observational, again, we may misestimate the nature of the phenomenon. And I'd like to show a great statement made by Richard Dolan on this topic. I respect Richard a lot, love his research, and do highly recommend following him and his work. And he makes some very good arguments, which I share as well and have for quite a long time.
I believe it is no accident that we are experiencing an enormous amount of UFO or UAP activity today and in the modern era. I think it is contingent on the development of ourselves as a species. I think it's the predominance of this phenomenon is intimately related to what we as human beings are up to, particularly since the age of science. I have been trying my very best to track the prevalence of UFO sightings throughout all of human history. I definitely believe that people are way, way too accepting of every single claim about ancient aliens that's out there. I think that is radically overstated. So if that's one thing where I'm going to disagree, I have a minority position here. I know that I have a minority position within the UFO community because I think most people will just reflectively say, oh, they've been here forever. They, whoever the they are. And I'm like, who are the they? Is it the gray aliens? Have they been here forever? Really? And on what evidence do you make that claim?
Okay. So I resonate with a number of points there. I do agree that we are looking at some kind of phenomenon that is probably that cannot fully be substantiated as ever present and as the same phenomenon as might have taken place in ancient times. How can we truly know these are the same entities, right? Do we even know who the entities are who are here now? And if not, how can we say that they were here in biblical times or before human history began even? And so a lot of wild assumptions, hopeful expectations are being kind of written into the space. And it's like, hold on, before we write those into the record, let's assess what we're even saying here and how we came to know it. I also think it's notable here in this statement by Richard that that the nature of the phenomenon is high volume. There's a lot going on, and that's worth taking note. Richard has estimated elsewhere that there might be, in his estimation, upwards of 50,000 credible sightings worldwide per year. And that might, in his estimation, be only 10% or less of what is actually taking place, because sightings are seen by people at random times, often by accident. And so who knows the true nature of what is encircling our globe every minute of every day? We don't know. Take into account further our oceans. And I know Richard is writing a series of books on underwater submersible objects, USOs, which I look forward to. And 71%, I believe it was, cases involve water in some ways. And so we might be looking at a phenomenon that is fixated on water or that is using water to transit our world in ways that we cannot detect and would never even think are happening. So this is the scale of the phenomenon. It is global. It is every minute of every day. There are many craft involved, many entities potentially, and multiple forces as well. And that's sobering when you think about that. That's a complex space. It's not so simple as, oh, we're interfacing with one or several benevolent space-faring species that are just here to observe temporarily and honor our space and do nothing, no harm to anyone. When you start to understand the true scope, the breadth, and the depth, it renders a different picture. And I think we need to begin talking about that. I don't hear many people talk about the nature of this being global and ever present every day. It seems to be more a focus on this being seemingly Western based. There's not a lot of discussion about what's happening elsewhere in the world, in Russia and China, for example. And one that is primarily an aerospace phenomenon, when really it is as much on land and in the water as it is in the air. So I think we need to have that conversation about what is the true scope of the phenomenon. Okay, let's move on to the next. We need to have this conversation as well. Is there a physical alien visitor in our world? Because if there is, if they are physical, not just interdimensional, nor angelic or non-corporeal, if they're physical, if they're alien, meaning not from here, and if they're, alien, meaning not us, and if they're a visitor, meaning not from here, that means some very significant things regarding how we might respond. If we're dealing with a set of entities that have naturally evolved in an evolutionary universe with environmental pressure and resource constraints, competition, adaptation, die-off as driving factors, that might be part of what has compelled them here in some fashion. If they are not physical, not alien, nor a visitor, whole different matter. And so I think we need to get down to whether this is the case or not. And it's not as much of a toss-up as I think many make it out to be. There are many records of people claiming to have had interactions with physical beings, many of them humanoid looking, but not always. The Betty and Barney Hill cases here, Travis Walton, the Ariel School, child witnesses, and then Charles and Calvin in the Pascagoula case, all depicted here on the slide. And individuals are reporting entities that look like this. They have eyes and noses and mouths and feet, bodies, okay? I know there's a great fascination right now with the expanded dimensions of the phenomenon beyond the physical, the psi part of the phenomenon, possibly the angelic or demonic association if there is one. But we have to anchor into the fact that we have been witnessing not only a solid physical phenomenon in craft, but solid physical entities in our world interacting with people in ways that might be safe or may not be safe. But we sure as heck better figure that out because people's lives could be impacted. And I think this is where we need to sober up and anchor into what we do know. These are the unknown knowns, the assets, the things we already can assess, but are not claiming. And so we go back into the possibility parade around the block again, and we say, well, maybe it's this, that, and everything. And it's like, or maybe it's a physical alien because, gosh, look at that entity right there. Sure looks like a physical alien to me. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, maybe it's a duck. Okay. And this is the sobriety I think we need to bring to this picture because as the global public interfaces with this, as I shared in episode 1, they're going to think alien. That's not to say that's true or fully the nature of the phenomenon, but that's where the global mind will probably go. Not non-human intelligence. Maybe some will go to angelic demonic, but when you have images like this and people reporting contact like they do, it's hard to call that an angelic event, right? So I think we need to get serious and talk about the physicality and the evolved entities that appear to be present in this picture. Now, I do want to take a minute and touch on the future humans theory. There is a theory that because these entities have structures similar to our own, and that it may be much less likely than more likely that those structures, such as eyes, ears, digits, would arise in the universe. We know they've arisen here. We don't know if they would arise in the universe with great certainty, that maybe these entities are us from the future. Maybe they broke away from our species lineage hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, adapted elsewhere, evolved, and then have come back. So this is a theory that is being discussed. And I want to just talk about this because there are some problems with this theory that, again, I do not hear in the conversation. And that's a little alarming to me. Well, first off, you might imagine this entity as possibly some future human, but this is not the only type of entity that is being seen by people. In fact, if you go to certain sources, one is the free survey by the Edgar Mitchell Foundation, which surveyed 3,000 experiencers. I'm not saying it's the world's greatest data set or the most complete representation of the phenomenon, but let me just note that only in 51% of the accounts in that data set do people mention the gray alien. In fact, they mention a variety of entities of vastly different morphologies than us: mantids, reptilians, immensely tall entities, things that you would never imagine might be us from the future. And so I think before we just say, oh, it's us from the future, well, first off, when you say they or us, well, who is they? Because there's multiple entities being reported. I had an image up here. I don't think I have it, but basically, I just wanted to put up several images of human ancestors in Neanderthal, chimpanzee, that broke off, that we diverged from hundreds of thousands of years ago or millions of years ago. And just also put on screen the image of a gray and just hold that up and be like, we are not chimps, but we look a heck of a lot more like a chimp than we do like this. Okay, so imagine even if this was us from the future. Just imagine for a moment. Is it really still us? Even if it broke off 100 million years ago, you could say, oh, it's not us, right? And so there's this automatic leap that just bounds over the problems with the theory in terms of substantiating it. How would we evidentially substantiate the claim of an NHI to be us from the past? Very difficult to do. But also, technically, we, Homo sapiens sapiens, are a distinct species from entities that might be a whole lot closer to us than these purported entities, even if we just go to the gray alien. I also think problematic here is there is a crisis of implications. If we're going to allow another entity to come into our space and claim that they are us, does that then mean that they get land, that they get rights, human rights? What are we entitling them to, and based on what evidence and indications? So there are problems with this theory, and I hope to have given you some of those right here. Okay, I'd like to move on to the next conversation. And I know this is possibly scary territory for some, but I would argue it has to be talked about, and we're gonna walk into it stepwise. But I know folks are very freaked out about what they might call a threat narrative or this being bad. And yet I would also be equally alarmed with how many people are automatically thinking it is good, okay, with not a whole lot of evidence available in the collective space to indicate that. So we're going to get into that now, but I think the question we need to be asking, is there a bad actor operating in our world? Because there are activities reported by NHI that are alarming, and we're going to walk through a few of those here. Get to my spot. There we go. At the very surface level are these possible incursions into sensitive nuclear facilities and other military sites that could provoke and cause some pretty high-risk situations to ensue. This is a clip from, I believe it's NBC, and followed by a statement from Ross Coulthart.
Now, for 17 days, mysterious drones, or UAPs, flew over a U.S. military base, leaving the Pentagon confused and unsure as to who was behind it, and that still seems to be the case. But now, at least, the Pentagon is confirming that those drones were, in fact, spotted hovering over Langley Air Base last year, and despite those drones violating U.S. airspace, they were not shot down, even though it looks like the commander of that base did have the authority to do so. And that's just one of the many instances of things flying with impunity over restricted airspace. And in
latest video from Langley Air Force Base, one of apparently a series of incidents that occurred throughout December where drone swarms were buzzing one of the most sensitive military facilities on the east coast of the United States. This is a base where they have F-22 stealth fighters. It's the forward defense base for the defense of Washington, D.C. and the East Coast. What the hell was it in December 2023 that was buzzing one of our most secure fighter bases?
Yeah. So these incursions are alarming, and there is no explanation for why they are happening. There's not conclusive indication that they are non-human. They could indeed be other phenomena. But there's a long history in ufology of these seeming shows of presence, a show of force, a show of capability over major cities, military sites, nuclear facilities, and basically demonstrating that they can do what they can do and we cannot stop it. And so is that part of the cover-up, right? Is to not allow the public to know that our governments with whom we hold this government citizen contract are not able to protect the citizenry, are not able to match this force. And that could be indeed part of the cover-up. So these incursions, they have to be talked about. They cannot be written off as a statement of peace because, you know, they disabled a nuclear weapons facility. By the way, they have also activated nuclear weapons at nuclear facilities, and not just once in history. And these altercations have caused potential harm to human beings in the aircraft, at the facilities involved, and there is a record of that as well. So what are these incursions about? Are they acceptable? We have to talk about that. But there is an incursion taking place. Moving on, I'd like to just share this statement. Let's see if I have it here. Yeah, I think I do. By Lue Elizondo, who the former director of ATIP, a Pentagon program to study UFOs, who has come out with, I believe, an important book called EMERGENT. And through this book, he's done a lot of interviews recently, there is some very important evidence that's coming forward, or at least testimonial evidence via him. And I think we need to take that into account as well. I've read a lot of his book. I don't have time to share much of it today, but this statement he made in an interview with Ross Coulthart stuck with me. And I didn't see anybody else identify or highlight this. And I thought this was quite notable. I'm going to play it a few times for you.
There's zero information to suggest what they are doing is for benevolent reasons. There's zero information to suggest what they are doing is for benevolent reasons.
Oh, I think we lost a word there. But what he says is there is zero information to suggest that what they are doing is for a benevolent purpose. Now, that does not mean it's a threat at all. And of course, when I posted this on Twitter, everyone cried foul and, couldn't handle it. It's like, why can't you handle that? Right? I mean, it is what it is. If there's information suggesting benevolent behavior, share it, put it out there. Let's see it. Let's see it. I would like to, please. What Lue is saying here is that there simply is not information to suggest a benevolent intent. Does not mean it's a threat. It could be neutral, right? It could be indifferent, right? Possible too. But the lack of behavior indicating benevolent intent is a very important indication, if true, and especially in light of the other contact-related phenomena that may be happening. And so in the space of what we have in terms of the evidence and the indications, if benevolence is not on the table due to the observed behavior of non-human intelligence, that leaves a narrower spectrum of probable explanations. And with that, we then go endeavor to narrow it further, if possible, and further, if possible, to create that assessment. And here I'd like to share a tweet from Bryce Zabel, which definitely stood out to me earlier this year. And yeah, we'll just read that together here. So Bryce says, I know what I'm about to say is going to be controversial to a number of people who study the UFO UAP issue. Based on past reactions, some will immediately accuse me of promoting a threat narrative. If that's the way this goes, I accept that. I'm simply afraid that our current search for data is just another attempt to prove to skeptics that UFOs are real. We know they are real, and we've known that for decades. It's time to move beyond that with at least some of our energy to try to find out who they are and why they're here. Thank you, Bryce. That's exactly my thoughts as well. My bottom line, I'm worried. It is time to consider the UFO UAP reality a national security threat and likely a global threat. I think he meant that as a question. And if it is not, then it is up to the governments of the world to share the photos, videos, data, studies, reports, witnesses, and other related evidence that prove it otherwise. Enough is enough. There are 3 reasons I'm concerned about what may be happening. And I'm going to just read the first part of each of these. UAP are continually interested in nuclear forces around the world, going back to the development of the atomic bomb in the 1940s, continuing through today. They have shown the ability to switch on and off our missiles. 2, there are simply too many accounts of some form of non-consensual interaction with humans, and I'm no longer willing to discount the tens or hundreds of thousands of such cases that have been reported over many decades and across many nations as fraud or insanity. No one seems willing to include the abduction phenomenon in the current, quote, search for data discussion. I am. Finally, these others, the non-human intelligence who appear to be among us, have not shared knowledge of their existence or why they are here in the first place, let alone why they're interested in our nuclear weapons or our bodies. Very good points made. And I think we have to turn to this and take this seriously. And we have to get out of this, take off these rose-colored glasses and start to deal with the entirety of this phenomenon and account for what is being reported by people. It is called testimonial evidence, admissible in a court of law, but not admissible in the court of opinion on the UFO phenomenon. Because I guess we think that people are unreliable, or we assume that all of these memories are regressed with hypnosis, which they are absolutely not. So we are not taking seriously the most intimate, direct impact that non-human intelligence may be having with human beings. And I think that is a mistake. So what kind of visitation is this? That is really the question at hand. And I think this is one of the really important questions we need to be diving into. Okay, let's check on time here. Hour in. All right. How's everyone feeling? I'll take a deep breath and a drink of water. A lot to get through. And we're on to the conversation number 5 of 9, that I think is very important. And it was, let's see here. Yes. And it was exactly brought up in Bryce's tweet. Is there a form of non-consensual contact taking place? What is the actual HI-NHI interface? Now, I know some do report positive experiences with these beings. In an abduction context, I don't think that can be yet taken at face value, because there are indications across abduction accounts that the non-human entities involved are capable of neurological control, screen memories, excitation of emotions, suppression of emotions. So to say, well, I had a good experience, that's, I'm sorry, if experienced under captivity, first alarming point, but second, with entities that have that capability, it's not enough to simply assume or conclude that they are benevolent, right? And when you consider that many do also, in addition to positive experiences, report highly negative, destructive, damaging experiences, such as undisclosed medical procedures, reproductive interventions, things that lead to long-lasting physical harm or injury. We have to take that into account. And again, assessment time, how do we assess that? It's hard to assess that as the act of a benevolent visitor. You could assess it as the act of an indifferent visitor. That's plausible, right? We stomp on anthills all the time. Are we malevolent? Not necessarily. We just don't care, potentially. That doesn't mean we should embrace this type of visitor. Maybe we should resist their presence, even though they're indifferent. And then we can go down the scale into basically self-interest or competitive self-interest or hostile interest, which I think are possibilities. I don't place the zone of probability on the far side of that scale myself, but I think we really have to ask, if there is a non-consensual form of contact taking place, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? And if there's a reproductive component, and many do claim that there is some sort of hybridization program underway, that there might even be hybrid individuals present in the world, what does that mean? And what are the implications of that? This is game-changing for the conversation. We are still entertaining what kind of is presupposed as a galactic observation, a science project remotely observing humanity, not involved, not taking a position, no stake, no interest, no intimate physical contact, no non-consensual contact. Folks, that's not the case. I don't believe that's the case. And I think if you disagree with me, that's fine. In fact, I embrace it. It's called a conversation. So make your case for abductions. If you think abductions are good, make your case. If you think they are part of a benevolent experiment or an upgrade on humanity, or that we made some kind of soul contract, make your case. But folks, I'm going to anchor back into those capabilities: logic, caution, plausibility, instinct, observation, evidence. We need to be leaning on all of those, not just a feeling or an intuitive sense, right? And so these are the human capability. If we don't bring those to bear, if we sacrifice those and just believe, wow, that's a mistake. And it could have consequences ultimately. And, the truth is, we're 80 years into this at least. This may be over 100 years old, 120 years old. How long have people been taken? And as part of what effort? There we go. Thanks, folks. Still working out the kinks in the new studio here. So thanks for hanging in there. All the good stuff is still to come. So no worries, nothing lost. Okay, so I'm going to move on now and talk about the seventh breakthrough conversation that I think needs to be happening. What are the risks and implications of adopting non-human technology and science? I don't hear a lot of folks talk about this. I hear a lot of conversation about the possibilities of free energy, of planet healing technologies that presumably would be granted to us free of charge, free of expectation, no strings attached. And not a lot of critical thought as to how these purportedly free technologies would be integrated into a competitive human world of 190 plus countries, markets, companies competing at all levels. How would we actually intake beneficial technologies? There could be hazard even in doing that, let alone if the technology was hazardous or the intent behind it was hazardous for us. Even if it was beneficial, it could be enough to start a global conflict, a world war, and it may already be enough to be fueling a secret arms race over these technologies and the fundamental science underlying them and the potential alliances with non-human intelligence that has enabled different state actors to get them. So I'd like to play for you this conversation. I played it actually at the end of episode 1, and I'd like to just basically carry it forward. And this is a conversation between Lue Elizondo and Jesse Michaels on the American Alchemy show, where Lue talks about this hypothetical sandbox in which there is a toy and multiple children who want to play with it. So let's watch this. It's about 4.5 minutes. And then we're just going to take that conversation forward. Feel free to share your thoughts, by the way, in the YouTube chat, on Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're watching. And I'm going to try to get that in front of me and interface with some of your questions and comments after this. All right.
Let's say there's a technology now, there's a toy that there's 12 kids in the sandbox, but there's only one toy, right? This toy has the ability to let everybody play together and be nice. The problem is human nature is such that most kids, most governments in this case, using it as an analogy, are going to want that toy for themselves. The world is on fire. Doesn't matter what side of the argument you're on. I think we can all agree that the world is a very dangerous and violent place right now, right? This technology has the chance to either bring us together or completely rip us apart once and for all, right? Like there's no coming back. How do you solve that problem?
It's a very hard problem to solve, but
it's only the hardest problem to ever.
you have to raise people's consciousness in step with slow dissemination of the thing or something. But
how do you stop that temptation? Because all it takes is one selfish kid to ruin it for the rest. Remember, one kid, no, it's my toy.
Probably just show them the good ways in which this technology could be used before you even just tell them that it exists.
Who does that? Who's going to take the moral high road and say, I give to you this technology and you shall use it for peaceful means? Who has that moral authority? Who's trusted enough in the world to do that and to say, you will use it for this, but not for that? Who?
I think it's probably going to be just a collective move and something that is like an emergent property of a lot of good people with good minds and good hearts coming together to.
Who is that? The United Nations?
I think it's
Is it society writ large?
Well, this maybe the NHI, maybe the entities themselves. I mean, we were with James Fox the other week in Austin, great guy, and I was talking to him, and he was like, I'm making all these documentaries, and the thing that has come up after decades of doing research on the UFO subject, whenever I'm about to find smoking gun proof of UFOs, I have, a video here, a picture here, an amazing eyewitness, the thing disappears. There's some like ephemeral, bizarre thing about that. And then if you were talking about the nuclear connection, as well. It's almost like there is a counter intel on the part of the NHI themselves, where it's like mass surveillance, and it is there right when it needs to be there, and things will disappear. And it's our most precious assets. It's our nuclear assets. They'll get by our most intense encryption from the NSA. And so my answer to that would be like, it's like the three body problem. They know we're going to blow ourselves up, so they clamp down on the science, and they're responsible for a lot of the productive science.
Would
in the past.
humanity be okay with an overlord, an NHI babysitter? Is
What?
that freedom? Are you really free then if an NHI were to come down and say, okay, folks, this is a reality. Ha ha ha. We've been kind of playing with you a little bit, but here's reality. You're all going to play well with each other. You're all going to be able to enjoy this free energy and whatnot. But you're going to play by our rules. Now what happens? Now what happens to free will? At that point, humanity is faced with the reality, potentially, that we're not the alpha species, right? And now that we have to do what something or someone else tells us to do. Is that free manifestation? Is that the ability for us to live our lives the way we want to live our lives, or the way we are told to live our lives? But are we ready, truly ready, for the truth to come out? Will we do the right thing, or will we do what we have always done in the past? Always. There's not one exception where we didn't use it against one another.
I'd like to believe that that we will make a better choice. I think.
Can we take a chance? Are you willing to take a chance on it? Let's say there's a technology now, there's a toy that there's 12 kids.
There we go. Yeah, fascinating little interaction there. I'm curious what came into your mind. Let's have the conversation. If these technological toys have ended up in our collective sandbox, let's move through it. One thing I did not hear in the conversation, it was actually my instant and immediate first response when Lue Elizondo created this hypothetical scenario, is why did they drop that? And what is that they dropped? I did note in this conversation, except briefly, there was no real questioning of the entities from whom this technology has come or has been derived. There's kind of I'm not saying they would assume this, but I think there is an assumption that is prevailing that these are the result of crash retrievals. So vehicles crash, or maybe they're shot down, and we go and gobble up the goodies and take them back to our laboratories and try to reverse engineer them and create whatever we can out of them, presumably weaponized technologies. Are we sure that these non-human intelligent entities, the craft involved, are not intentionally depositing either themselves, the full craft, or objects within the craft into our space? Are we entirely sure these are fully the result of crash retrievals and not granted technologies, transacted technologies, right? And so if you have a sandbox full of toddlers, and an entity comes along who is not permitted in the school, should not be there, and that's the first problem, right? And again, we have to question the entities in our space. They are operating in covert fashion. They are engaged in divisive activities, working with competing defense establishments, competing world superpowers in ways we don't understand. It's an undisclosed presence, extent of activity, intent. It's a problem. We have to confront that before we start pointing fingers at each other and say, you did it first. You took the tech away from me. Now it's my turn. Okay, so even preceding this sandbox dialogue here, I think we need to start asking about the individual who walked past the sandbox and how their items ended up inside it. That's one thing I would say. I also want to just say, we're not toddlers in a sandbox. We are adults, most of us. I have a toddler, so I don't say all of us, but we as human beings collectively, as a global community, we still have some degree of ability to gather, to make agreements, to devise treaties, to to enter into binding agreements with one another, enter alliances with one another. So we are capable of that. We are not toddlers. We are more mature than that. And so, regardless of who walked past the sandbox and what they dropped, we are actually capable of getting together on the global stage and talking about it. And to my knowledge, this has not happened, but of course, it may have happened in secret fashion. Who would I be to know? But I would be curious to know, have there been attempts to work in an intergovernmental way to produce at least some disclosure as to what each party has recovered or been given or transacted for? All three: discovered, received, transacted. And to dialogue on how that is going to be managed, what rules will be in place to protect even non-state actors getting their hands on that technology. We do this for all sorts of things, for nuclear material, for chemical weapons. We're talking about doing it for AI, which everyone thinks is the really scary intelligence, the AI, right? Well, what about the other AI? What about the alien intelligence? No one talks about that. That might be a conversation for later, not yet today. It's beyond the scope of these 9 conversations, but we are capable of some degree of collaboration. So that needs to be explored. We need to question the entities that brought this into our space. We need to understand what it is they have deposited and how, to what degree that has been integrated into our human technologies and economies today. Is this living in a hangar somewhere? It's been experimented on by 10 people, or is this literally the reason why I have an iPhone on the table? We need to understand that. So in this hypothetical, we need a little bit more information. Also, 2 more things. I think there is a viable call to make that a moratorium should be in place on the direct receiving of non-human technologies from non-human entities, right? Should anyone be meeting with these entities and actually receiving things from them? Like, should that be happening? Are we a divided humanity, a world with 1,000 crises ready to erupt, with global governing systems that are hanging just by a thread right now, right? When you consider the conflicts underway, the state of the climate change reality, we can barely agree and enforce those things. Should we be meeting on the side with non-human entities at military bases receiving technologies? There's a potential risk there that is asymmetric, unmanageable, and if left unabated and allowed to just continue on, could produce serious negative effects for our world. Okay, so the concept of a moratorium is one I'd like to just throw out there. And then last, folks, this is why we need disclosure. We need to take this out of the hands of the few who maybe they thought they were doing the right thing, the American thing, but then there's their Chinese counterpart who thought they were doing the right thing for their country and for their political party. Okay, it's not tenable for this to be in the hands of a few and for them to manage, essentially to determine what could be major species outcomes in 100 years or 200 years. That they could be doing things that destabilize the balance of power and the nature of cooperation among states in the world. So this is why we need disclosure. It needs to come out into the public so that we can at least look at this thing. And to lose, very challenging question at the end, can we trust ourselves? Can we trust ourselves? I don't know about with the technology, but with disclosure, yes. Yes. But we need to be asking not just for government disclosure. That's just one of the disclosures. I introduced this at the beginning of the episode. There are 4: citizen, government, NHI, exosystem. The government can disclose what the government knows, but do they know everything that has happened with the citizens, the global citizens of this world? Do they know what the NHI have done outside their purview in other parts of the world, outside the defense establishment of their given country, for example? Possibly not. Do they have a clear picture of NHI intent? Possibly not. They may be very deluded or misguided in their notions about these beings, why they're here, and what they have done overall. It is possible that there is no one driving this bus, folks. That is how hazardous the situation is. And, this is the conversation we need to have. There is real hazard in the space. We'll put threat aside. We don't even need to talk about the intent of the NHI. Just their presence operating in our world in this way, putting toys like this in our sandbox could be enough to essentially terminally end the human experiment at a global level, right? It's that big. And so this is the nature of the event taking place, and this is the level of seriousness I think we need to bring to it. Okay, let me see here. Okay, we're getting down to the home run, the home wire here. So stick with me, and we'll switch gears toward the end and talk about a few other things. Conversation number 8. What is the NHI program, and what is its influence and involvement in our world? I would argue that after all this time, we are not seeing a remote observation, a temporary science experiment. We are seeing an incursion, which is well established. Alrighty, we're back. So as I was saying, the next conversation I think we need to have is about the possibility that there is a program underway that has actual influence, actual involvements in the world. And as I was saying, I would argue after these 80 to 100 years of observation of this phenomenon that we're not dealing with a temporary visitation. We're not dealing with a remote observation. This is an incursion into our human space in a programmatic fashion. So what is the program? What is it doing, right? And how is it interfacing with our programs for human growth, development, technological advancement? This is an important conversation to have. There are indications, growing indications, that there may be bases of operation in our world, in remote areas, mountainous regions, at the bottom of the ocean. There are even indications of non-human intelligence fighting one another in our space. What would that mean? And I have a clip to show right here. This is Richard again talking about the possibility of actual dogfights between UAP.
And I have come across claims of dogfights among UAP in the 21st century that are, one in particular that I'm thinking of was supported by at least 3 specific witnesses reporting separately to a particular website about it. I'll have all of that out at some point. The idea of UFOs or UAP dogfighting each other seems a little out there for people, but there have been a number of these, at least allegations that are out there. So it's interesting that you're stumbling into this as well. Very interesting.
Yeah. So what does that mean if there's actual conflicting interests in our space? There's also possibly indications that that crimes have been committed, not just by human actors, but non-human actors. And I'd like to share this this video with you. This is Ross Coulthart interviewing a journalist who is responsible for bringing forward the revelations about Immaculate Conception recently. So I'll cue that up. There we are.
There's some sense in which there's just fear of public panic. And I think there's some reason to worry about that. I also think it can be overstated. I think that there's some genuine concern that these technologies are an advantage to the United States against our earthly adversaries. That's I find that plausible. And then I think the other more troubling, conclusion would be that there's some bad things that have been going on as part of this. I'll use the word cover up, because that's what it is. There's some troubling behavior.
Right. So what Michael is talking about there are claims of people being harmed or even killed as it relates to programs within the U.S. government. He actually goes on to talk about the statements made by David Grush at the hearings in Congress last year. But I only introduced this to say that there is bad behavior going on. And are we sure it's purely human? We don't know. There are growing indications that there is some kind of a hot war between, or at least a hot aggression, as it's being claimed, between the U.S. government and non-human intelligence, attempting to bring down these craft using direct energy weapons, microwave beams, that kind of thing, in an offensive capacity. And of course, the immediate reaction of most is, this is terrible. What are we doing? We're harming or possibly killing non-human intelligence. Who's asking, what are they doing? And is it possible this government and others are operating in a defensive fashion? I don't know if I've heard a single person even ask the question. And again, I go back to, this is the problem of the UFO community being so fraught with its own human tendencies towards novel distraction, its own assumption of government bad, ET good, but also the obfuscation and the corralling that's occurred that has driven some of these narratives and prevented a real logical thought. That these thoughts I'm having, these conversations I'm opening, to me, they're obvious. And as I get into in a minute, I've had these conversations with people out in the world on the street. They get it. It's not that hard to understand that there is competition in the world and in the universe and in nature. And so, but it seems to be that within this inner circle, in the concentric circles that I showed, it's very, very difficult for folks to interface logically and to think through things holistically. That's a concern. That's why I launched this show right here. And so hopefully these conversations, my hope is that they stimulate shows to come, panels, guests. We can have these conversations in the wide open and open it up fully. Okay. Now on to the last. Let's see here. There we go. All right. So finally, what is the cost of human inaction regarding this activity by non-human intelligence? Is there a cost? It's a question. We could ask the question, if we did nothing in response to them, what would be the potential outcome? Would there be no outcome? Would they just, remove themselves from our human sphere and we go on organically developing as we have? Or is there an actual cost to inaction? This is the step back I think we need to do. There is, in essence, a superpower present in our world unaccounted for. Russia, China, the United States, the BRICS, right? The other major economies, But there is potentially another force that trumps all of them individually, possibly all of them entirely. You could call that a superpower. Is the NHI a power at that level? When you look at some indications of their behavior in the world, we have football field-sized craft traveling underwater. Now, in my mind, I say, if this is an observation, why would you need a craft that large? That to me looks like a program. Okay. If we're talking about bases of operation, if ultimately we're talking about an abduction program leading to reproductive interventions, that looks like a program. And so I think we need to start talking about the cost of inaction. And what that naturally leads to is, well, what should be our human response to contact? And that is exactly the question I want to leave you with here, because ultimately we have to mount some kind of species level response to this visitation. We can stay completely divided, balkanized in our response, every country for itself, and we'll have the tragedy of the commons, and the world will be the commons, and the human citizenry might be the commons. These are the consequences of not taking any coherent action. Better, I think, is to devise or even propose some coherent action and negotiate that with others. That was what was in my framework at the farther side of the spectrum, is once you have a working conclusion, then you can take a position, and then you can talk about, well, what on earth should we do? And I don't hear much of anyone talking about that. Instead, we're fascinated in the events of the day, the evidence that's just hot off the press, speculation, theorizing, etc. We're not asking intelligent questions about the visitation as a contact event with implications for the human species as a whole. And I think we need to start doing that. And it is my hope that disclosure of this in the public yields the ability for us to do that. And a big part of that has really nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with us. Ultimately, this could be one visitation of many. It could be the first of many. It could be the last of many. There could be 5 entities in our world, 10 entities in our world. In the end, though, we still need to do what we need to do. We need to become a coherent species with a will and intent of our own. We need to vocalize that in the universe. We need to send it out there. We need to send that message out into space to say, this is who we are. This is how we want to relate to other forms of life. This is how we understand this world to be our world of origin, or our world of genesis, or even just our sovereign world. However you want to describe our relationship with this planet and its moon, and begin to talk to the universe about us, and not just wait here to be discovered and to be interacted with on terms not of our own. We need to devise our terms, our rules of engagement. We need to start having the international conversation and talk about what rules-based system should govern the nature of contact with individuals, with states, with militaries, with defense establishments, with corporations, with universities at all levels. That conversation is coming. And I think it's valuable for those of us who have been in this field a while to start casting our attention out to that bigger picture line in the sand way out there, and start thinking about what would those courses of action ultimately be? What is the framework for how this world, as divided as it is, will interact intelligently and safely and consensually with other forms of life that have undertaken some kind of programmatic effort, either to visit or to enter our space or to cohabit our space. So we need to start having these conversations. So with that, I'm going to turn a light switch and shift gears and talk about something else that I'm passionate about, and that is the focus of this show. And let's talk about people. Let's talk about taking this issue out to the streets and talking to people. Ultimately, in the end, we have to engage the rest of humanity. If we keep this a niche, novel conversation of intrigue and paranormal fascination for the few, we have. But I believe if this is a contact event at the level of the whole world, that we need to engage the global public. And believe it or not, you could do it tomorrow. You could do it at the cafe over coffee. It can happen at any moment. And to me, that's, you could call citizen disclosure. citizens not only disclosing what they know, but going out and disclosing the phenomenon and what they know about it to those who don't know, to that larger circle in the concentric circles. So I have on image here, I've been privileged in my life to travel extensively. Basically, right after high school graduation, I was in a small town, and I had had enough of small towns, and I was a world person, and I had to get out there. It was the months after 9/11. I felt the world changing. I knew about the presence of non-human intelligence, absolutely. And I knew it was having an impact, and I could feel the world change, and I needed to feel that impact and see what on earth might that be. So I embarked on a series of journeys, many of them solo. My first destination was the place I had known I needed to go for 2 years at that point. I had this strange knowing, this like just inner sense that I needed to go to a country called Turkey. And honestly, as a 16-year-old in high school, I barely knew where that was. I didn't know what language they spoke. And even as I got off the plane there, I still did not know what language they spoke. And so I thrust myself into the belly of the world and made myself vulnerable to its vicissitudes and its random acts of kindness, many of which I was the recipient of. And I was able to travel ultimately extensively in the Middle East, and then later Southeast Asia, South America, all over Europe. So I just have a little map here of the countries that I've been privileged to visit in my years in the world. I'm much more landed now. I'm a father. I have a lot on my plate, so there's not much traveling going on anymore. But I think back to all these places I've been and to the hundreds upon hundreds of people I have talked to about this phenomenon. And if I may, I'll just give a few anecdotes, and I invite you to do the same. Share in the chat if you've had what I would call the conversation with people in your life, friends, family, coworkers. I know we've all had experiences of it not going well. So I know we've had that experience of ridicule, dismissal, being called names, right? I know I have to. But I've also had some pretty transformative interactions around this with people right on the street level. And I'll share just a few kind of anecdotes. And with that, some insights that come to mind about how we might choose to engage the public. And so I've got a few stories that I'll just share. These are just interactions I've had: Seattle, Bogota, Colombia, Kyiv, Ukraine, Turkey, Syria, and Iran. So I'll just run through those. You know, often what I'll say, and I gave you my opening line if you were watching episode 1, I'm working on UAP disclosure. Just say that. And people are like, really? Well, what do you know? And I can't tell you how many times someone has just looked at me and said, well, what do you know? Because they're fascinated, right? I mean, the global public, it's not a mass of ignorant people. And then there's like just this little community of, the cult of the informed, the ones who are elected to know the truth. No, I mean, yeah, it's a small community who has an understanding, but it's a huge community that has an awareness and a curiosity. So as long as you don't say that beings from X star system are coming to save us and we need to receive this technology and it'll heal the world, and okay, people are not going to respond well to that, nor are they going to respond well to that there are reptilians that are coming to suck us dry of our blood and do terrible things to us. And okay, so put those to the side. Just say that you're dealing with the enigma. And I've said this because I am dealing with the enigma, and I've had amazing conversations with people, and they want to know what I know. And I start from the surface of the phenomenon. I avoid its deepest depths, because you can certainly scare people talking about that, and just inch in and use what has been established in the public domain, right? There is demonstrated interest by many government agencies, many three-letter acronym military organizations of an interest in UFOs and a concern. It's all out there, right? The Air Force, the Navy, NSA. These documents are in the public domain. They've been FOIA'd. Speak to that. Speak to an interest on behalf of human authorities in the phenomenon, and then talk about the preponderance of data that craft have been seen by the most credible of people. And with that, this is important. I go to what people would assume this visitation is, and I start there. And that is the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Many people, for whatever reason, whether they find it most logical, maybe they've been conditioned to think in these terms, or maybe we're at this point where science is enabling us to detect Earth-like worlds and imagine that, wow, if life arose here, it might arise there, right? And so science is equipping us with the ability to look out into the universe and to imagine a universe that is an environment of nature. And so I introduce this as a potential extraterrestrial visitation to people. And 80% of the time or more, people are like, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I doubt we're alone. I mean, look what happened on Earth. Earth gave rise not just to us, but to billions of forms of life. And some of them, you could argue, are sentient in addition to our own. There seems to be a proclivity in this universe at a natural level to give rise to life. People get that. If we introduce fringe theories or introduce multiple competing theories that try to account for the entirety of the phenomenon, in all of its non-physical dimensions, people are like, whoa. And so I think the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, is a solid way to introduce this to people. I'm a little amazed at how much avoidance there is of talking about aliens because that's what people think exist. Not everyone believes demons exist as are described in one religion versus another. Not everyone believes, nor should they, that interdimensional beings are capable of producing the physical phenomena that we're seeing. It's highly theoretical. It's not to say it's impossible. It's theoretical, folks. And for the public, interdimensionality that's science fiction. Alien life being possible and potentially appearing in our skies and oceans via the UFO phenomenon, that's also science fiction to some, but it's not to many, many others. And so I've had conversations all over the world. I talked to a group of imams at a madrasa in Shiraz, southern Iran, with my family when I was traveling Iran for a month. And we talked all about the potential of other worlds, of other life, and that God is the author of those worlds and the life upon them. They got it. I actually had an amazing encounter with a conservative imam in northern Syria. This was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years before the series of revolutions that rocked that part of the world. He took me into his home. He housed me for multiple days. He introduced me to his extended family. I spoke Turkish, and he had some Turkish contacts we were able to translate. Ultimately, an English teacher came and translated. And his living room was full of people talking to me about the possibility that we're not alone in the universe and that God has created something much more than just Earth. This was a debate, a full-on, sweaty debate about whether humanity was the center of that universe and whether God has specifically authored all things at the level of authorship, or whether they naturally arose and evolved from divinely initiated laws or processes. Okay, so we had a very fun theological debate, but in the end, we walked away friends. And he said to me, I remember, he dropped me off at the bus station on my way back wherever I was going to Lebanon, possibly, and he said, "I do not agree with you, but I know you are a good man, and I respect what you were telling me." So, both a good story about human beings establishing a human connection, but also talking about the reality of life that is non-human in a larger universe of God's creation. Fascinating stuff, and left good impressions all around. I have had many Uber conversations. I am a voracious, conversant person in my Uber rides and taxi rides. And I've had so many interactions. One was in Bogota on the way to the airport with a taxi driver. Now, we talked for probably 30 minutes about the possibility of alien life. And that, if we live in a universe of natural forces that have given rise to adaptation at the level of species, then maybe it's happening out there. maybe we have something they want, or maybe we're threatening what they want beyond our world, where we're seen as a threat. So people can engage. One notable example, I was in Kyiv, Ukraine last year. I was able to take a very impactful trip and to see some of the battle scars of the Battle of Kyiv. And it's just amazing. I'll just note this. Further discussion later about that war and its causes and what it's doing to the world. But I'll just note this. Nobody could engage with me at all on this topic. I talked to waiters, to taxi drivers, and no wonder why. Like, look what those people are going through, right? But this is the toll of human conflict and distraction. Not to say they're distracted, but they're in conflict, but others are distracted. Others are overtaken by other human concerns that inhibit their ability to turn their eyes upward to the sky and to perceive the event happening and that it might have an extraterrestrial origin. So it was a sobering moment. I went there hoping to talk to people, and nobody would engage me despite my best efforts. And sobering. Being in a war zone is sobering, and going into an air raid shelter every night is sobering. And so I think there is just this risk of humanity descending into increasing conflict, dysfunction, and breakdown. And again, this non-human force is not necessarily going away. I don't know how they regard all of the events in our world, but they might regard them as opportunities, as risks, many different possibilities there. And we need to talk about that. So happy to introduce some of those anecdotes to you. And before we end, I just want to end on this compelling presentation, really it was, but I'll just play a clip of it, of Carl Nell talking about, in his words, first principles thinking as one of the tools by which we can begin to assess this phenomenon. And I like to think in this way. And so I'd like to share this with you and then leave you with some closing thoughts, and we'll go from there.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity on this planet. This interaction is ongoing and it's not new. And there is zero doubt. But you already knew that. So how do we go about convincing other people that this is the case? Particularly people that aren't necessarily privy to all the information that some of us may otherwise be. And so there's three principal lines of effort, three principal sources of data. There's essentially the first principles argument, which basically says, counter to common belief, that life is common in the universe. How do we know life should be common in the universe? There's 20 billion sun-like stars in the universe. The sun is a population 1 star. There are planets like this, there's stars like the sun that are 5 billion years older than the sun. That's plenty of time for other civilizations to evolve on these other planets. There is recent scholarship that says that life evolved on Earth in the Hadean era. The Hadean era was before the crust even cooled. There's recent scholarship that says that microbes have been found in terrestrial rock that have dated to 2 billion years ago, essentially in stasis. So life evolved here very quickly. There are many, many planets like the sun, and there are many, many planets that are much older than the sun. People that would argue that life is uncommon have to justify that proposition more than anyone would have to justify the fact that life evolves very quickly.
Yeah, so I think what Carl is sharing here is thinking in a stepwise fashion from truths that have been established by science that are, you could say, unassailable. They're not unassailable, but they're established and they're firm, and thinking forward from those and using what we know about nature, the universe, species interaction and development and evolution to think through the possibility and to land on this very firm reality that, yes, the universe could give rise to other forms of life. And that there's no wonder he's talking about this on Disclosure Day several days ago, and that might be a component of what we're looking at in this phenomenon. I think the global public is ready to hear that. They're ready to think through this event based on its own inherent evidence as a phenomenon, the observations and the eyewitness testimony that has come forward, and first principles thinking like this. which yields a very plausible scenario, right? And here I'd like to share with you an article that I wrote last week, which there's a couple statements in this I think that are really important here. The universe as nature, anticipating encounters with non-human intelligence. I'm just going to read the first couple paragraphs here. I'll read this caption. Should we be anticipating a natural universe in which environmental pressure and resource constraints are driving factors in the interaction between non-human intelligences? As we examine the growing evidence for unidentified anomalous phenomena and the possibility that a non-human intelligence is interacting with humanity, we should pause to take stock of what we know about nature, evolution, and species interaction. Specifically, we should be using what we know about the human species and species interaction within our world in order to anticipate the nature and motive of non-human species from beyond our world. Just like solar physicists study our sun in order to understand the mechanism of other stars in the universe, we should be using what we know about the evolutionary behavior of the one sentient species we can study most extensively and already have, Homo sapiens sapiens. Take a moment to consider this fundamental truth. The universe gave rise to us. Whatever exists out there is reflected partly, even if only partly, in what exists here on Earth. They are not universes apart. The value of this kind of knowledge base, the knowledge base of the human species and its interactions came home to me because I worked down the hall from the High Altitude Observatory in Colorado, one of the premier institutes focused on studying solar weather and the behavior of our sun. And I know this because I worked next to a lot of these folks that many of them were solar physicists. They were actually using our sun to understand stars. I'm like, wow. And that's all they did. In their at least in their job title there, they focused on this sun to understand the stellar environment. And so how apropos for us to also consider using our species, the one that we can study most intimately, to understand the potential evolutionary forces that play out at a whole species level, even at an individual level. We are not fundamentally apart from the universe, and the universe is not fundamentally apart from us and our Earth. So I thought I would leave you with that. And I think the public is ready for this kind of conversation. So some take-homes from everything I've shared with you. We need to examine the point of highest impact that non-human intelligence is having upon our world. And I believe that is the direct interface with single human beings. The government has part of the disclosure of that, but not the whole. The citizens have another part of that disclosure. Ultimately, the NHI have the biggest part of that disclosure, but they are non-disclosing. That's a problem. And so we might have to infer some things based on what we can observe. Ultimately, there is a fourth disclosure, and that is a disclosure of our exosystem, the environment around our Earth, whatever it may be, whether it's a complex, dense environment of interaction, or whether it's a sparse one. We don't know yet fully. But we need to ultimately come to understand the environment in which we live, because that will help us to understand the entities that come from that environment. If we think we're living in the countryside, but we're really in inner city New York City, in terms of an interstellar environment, we're going to misinterpret potentially the nature and intent of the entities in that environment. Likewise, if we think we're in the middle of a city and we're not, same thing. And so ultimately, we will need insight into that. And it's enough right now to ask the question, to expand into the possibility of what that could be, but also to deal with the urgent and consequential nature of the visitation in our world right now. So disclosure at those four levels, I think, are really important. I'd like to talk in closing about the election and the November hearing. I'll play this clip for you. It might give you a flavor of what's on deck in this election with regards to contact and the non-human intelligence. And of course, we can only speculate as to who wins the election and what their choices would be with regards to disclosure. I'll play this for you now. This is Joe Rogan and candidate for President Donald Trump talking about people from space.
People coming from space, you know.
Yes.
And I know you're interested in
Oh,
that.
I'm very
too.
interested in that. How much did they tell you about that?
A lot.
Really?
Yeah.
What'd they tell you? How much can you tell?
So
How's that work? Is it like super
I think
top
I
secret?
Can tell, you know,
Tell me.
Okay. I think we didn't get it all. Shoot. But the point being, and I at first I saw this as kind of a fumble for the team because I know these two individuals know a whole lot more than they're saying. It's a brief interaction, maybe 30, 40 seconds. And it seems to not reveal very much. On the other hand, this interaction occurs right after a conversation about the JFK files. And Trump actually brings it up instantly. It's quite clearly a mental association in his own mind. But I've come to understand that it's an actual association, that there is an implication, the UFO phenomenon in what happened to JFK. And so that it came up in rapid succession was not surprised. But people from space, okay, are we talking about angels? Are we talking about demons? Are we talking about crypto-terrestrials? Are we talking about interdimensionals? Well, Donald Trump wasn't. He was talking about people from space. I guess you could interpret that as future humans, maybe. How much have they told you? A lot. Wow. And basically, Trump goes on to say that he can't really say much more. But you can see the gravity in this interaction and the pregnant weight of how much could be said but can't be said and can only be said very awkwardly. And I think that it just kind of sums up the egg that we are sitting on, right? There is something very big under the skin of our world. It's a secret that runs very deep, that has had a real impact on the state of affairs, and it has had that impact for decades. And we are going to come into some awareness of the truth and the full scope and breadth and depth of that impact as the years goes on, I hope. But it's a big issue. It's a big ticket item, and I respect that. And I'm not one to say, you know, we want the truth yesterday, damn it. I do want the truth. I want people to have the truth. But I think we're not really talking about what that truth even is. What is it that will be disclosed? That's everything, right? We just want the truth. What if the disclosure is of an event with massive detrimental and problematic implications for world stability? What if it's one in which one state actor has betrayed human interests against all of our interests? What if it's one in which crimes have been committed with NHI, by humans, with using technologies gained by NHI, right? It's immense. And so it needs to come out in gradual fashion, as I hope it is. I know there are people who know inside the executive branch, inside Congress, who are coming into some clear picture as to the event taking place. I think there is real risk for this to be continually obfuscated, swept under the carpet, but also for there to be a false disclosure. The disclosure of this presence in a way that favors an individual politically, that can be used to aggrandize oneself or one's country, or that could be used for information war, essentially, grounds upon which to commit further conflict in the world and take the fight to the shores of other countries in ways that might be desired. I think there's a lot of risk. And that's partly why there's a UFO calling. That's why we're needed, especially if you are someone who has lived with this for a long time, possibly your whole life, as I have. We are needed. And I was called out last year. I was called right out of my career. I was called to whatever this front line is. I'm still trying to find it and trying to figure out what it is I need to do. This show is a direct expression of that. There's no other reason I would be sitting here. I was not wanting to get back into this topic several years ago. I was actually avoiding it, the approach aversion. And now I'm in it. And I know others are getting into it. And it makes total sense because the risk of this being mistold to the public, misused for private, state, or corporate ends is very real. And somebody has to be out there speaking the truth to this reality and also speaking to its deeper dimensions and not allowing, to Bryce Zabel's point, the issue of non-consensual contact to be swept away, that uncomfortable thing to just be wiped away, and we can say, oh, no, they're just showing up now, or they're coming. They're coming in a decade or 100 years. We have time, three-body problem. We have time, don't worry. It's a new phenomenon. No, it's not. So somebody who knows that better speak up. And somebody who knows the nature of the NHI-HI interface better speak up. And the whole has to be reflected in this disclosure. Otherwise, it's not disclosure. And I hope to make my contribution to that. I do want to even share with you the logo for this show. A couple people asked me about that. What's with the color bar? And what's with the orb, with the dawning? Well, it's inspired by disclosure. Those four colors: yellow, urgency; magenta, excitement, expansion, curiosity; red, problem, challenge, adversity; and then the deep blue, right? Which is, we get to go into this greater panorama of life. And ultimately, if we make it through this process, we get to explore. And we get to be a part of that fabric of life and potentially express our humanity in ways we never have been able to discover a whole other dimension to ourselves individually, if we are people who have not just a human lineage or a human story, but a greater community story. So there's tremendous power and potential there, I feel, and I look forward to being a part of that. The other image for the show art of the sphere emerging, I have spent many early mornings in the third world, in places where there is tremendous smog and just a thickness of both physical and mental environments with poverty and struggle and conflict. And I usually get up before dawn in those places when the city is asleep, and I go out on a walk. And I've taken many of those walks at the dawn hour in many cities around the world: Phnom Penh, Ho Chi Minh City, Tehran, Beirut, Kyiv. And it's a powerful experience to do that, to feel into the place while everyone is largely still asleep. But so many of those dawns, I saw the sun arise out of that murk, out of that thick, dense cloud of confusion and struggle and strife. And there's the sun peeking up above all of it, dawning. And I feel a disclosure will be like that as well. We have this world, it's confused, it's divided, we're terribly distracted with each other and with our conflicts, and yet this reality is slowly rising out of the murk in this dawning of the truth that contact is underway with potential non-human intelligences from beyond our world. The biggest event in human history, the biggest realization of what we're a part of and have been a part of since the dawn of human life. And we get to be a part of some little bit, some sliver of that sunrise. The sun will not go all the way up over that horizon and dawn brilliant for us in the next year or two or three. But we get to be a part of that incremental movement into global consciousness now. So I'm very grateful for that. So with that, whatever happens next, it's going to happen. And there's a lot coming. There's apparently 2 hearings in Congress regarding UAP disclosure. Several documentaries, several mini-series are out right now. There's a lot going on. It's going to be quite the month of November. So hang tight, hold your head, keep thinking logically, and I'll be seeing you as we go through it. I'll definitely be doing the next episode. I'll focus on the results of the election and possibly look ahead to some possible routes for disclosure into the new year. We'll talk about the hearings, and we'll basically take this play by play, snap action, and see what we need to do next. So before I say goodnight, I just want to leave you with a little bit of eye candy. This is the intro sequence to the MGM series that I just mentioned that's coming out. And just watch this astutely. Do your communications analysis on this and see what you take away. And after that, I'll be saying goodnight, and we'll look out to the next episode of Emergent. Pretty powerful stuff. I have to say, if someone's willing to spend the money to make a series introduction like that, you can't say the public doesn't want to know, and that there's not a lot of appetite, interest, and even need to know out there. So it's exciting times for those who've been in this game for a while, and look forward to seeing how this plays out. Thank you for joining me tonight for episode 2 of Emergent. Here I have a link to my newsletter. Every Monday, I'm sending out a newsletter with podcast summaries, key ideas to consider into the week ahead, further thoughts on recent events in the UFO UAP phenomenon, and also questions and topics for future discussions. So I highly recommend getting on my newsletter. If you have show ideas, guest ideas, requests, topics on your mind, feel free to email me at info@reedsummers.com. And with that, look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, Friday, 9 o'clock Eastern, for episode 3 of Emergent. And with that, I'll sign off and say good night. Thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you next time.